Investigators from the Fremont County Sheriff's Office and the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agency discovered over 115 deceased bodies stored in the Return to Nature Funeral Home. Without providing too much detail to avoid further victimizing these families, the area of the funeral home where the bodies were improperly stored was horrific. To give you an idea of the scope of this search, the area to be searched is over 2,500 square feet. After the scene is made safe and the appropriate personal protective equipment is issued, dignified treatment of the deceased is our next priority.
Welcome back to another episode of Operation Evil. I'm your host, Nyoka.
And I am your co-host, Megan.
And today's episode is brought to you by Megan.
And this is episode 122. It's called The Return to Nature Funeral Home. 190 victims. All right. So Return to Nature Funeral Home started in 2017. It was owned by a couple, John and Carrie Halford. It was based in Colorado Springs, Colorado. They offered environmentally friendly burials, such as burying deceased in wicker baskets, among other eco-friendly options. Yes.
I didn't even know that was an option.
This is very eco-friendly. You know, we want everything to be absorbed into the earth. 2 locations existed. The specific location was the Penrose, Colorado, one where they housed remains. And that was about 2 hours south of Denver. The other one, I guess they didn't house remains there. They don't talk about it. So I didn't dig into what the other one was. But this is where the victims are found. All right. The website stated, this is what the website specifically said before they took it down. Quote, green burial is a natural way of caring for your loved one with minimal environmental impact. Green burial aids in the conservation of natural resources, reduction of carbon emissions, and the preservation of habitat without the use of harsh embalming, chemicals, metallic, plastic, or unnatural items. You can still view your loved one who is not embalmed. Embalming is not a law. In the state of Colorado, within 24 hours, the body must be either embalmed or placed in a regulated temperature-controlled environment, meaning under refrigeration, dry ice, etc. End quote. So you know me, I like my timelines. So my timeline starts October 4th, 2023. Fremont County Sheriff's Office in Colorado were dispatched to Return to Nature Funeral Home in Penrose, Colorado, due to complaints of a putrid smell by neighbors and suspicions from coroners. As the investigation was underway, 115 human remains were found being improperly stored in makeshift refrigeration units that were not operating on the property inside a bug-infested space of about 2,500 square feet. And I know I'm jumping the gun when I say this. It's way worse than just bug infested at this point in time. It's horrid. Dispatched to the scene included the Sheriff's Department as well as Fremont County's Coroner's Office, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the Colorado Department of Public Health, and the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies. The crime scene was so horrific that they had to call in the FBI and the specialized crime scene investigation units for larger scale crime scenes, such as those that were dispatched to 9/11. The reason being, they couldn't make out the remains. They were pretty much liquefied.
Oh my God.
The scene was so bad that a paramedic who first responded developed a rash and had to be medically evaluated. With our technology
responding?
He was the first one in. I mean, that's how bad it was. I don't think anybody realized the severity of this and how bad it was until they entered. Okay. With our technology today of DNA, dental recognition, and medical device recognition, it is still not something with a quick turnaround time. Fremont County Sheriff Alan Cooper stated, quote, "There have been a lot of questions and concerns expressed by the community, especially those families who entrusted their loved ones to this funeral home," end quote. The DNA testing would take months, as it does, and victims would be notified once bodies were identified. The Sheriff's Department asked that family members who utilize the Return to Nature funeral home please send an email in to their office to help aid the investigation. At this time, it wasn't clear if an actual crime was committed, and no arrests were made yet. However, the owners of the funeral home were being cooperative, and the investigation was ongoing at this point. However, a disaster declaration had been made by the governor, and local officials have declared an emergency at this point in time. So how horrific was it? Disaster declaration horrific. That's how bad this was.
Like FEMA? Like
I'm talking like when they walked in, they were, I don't want to say up to their knees in liquefied human remains, but that to the extent of it, it was so bad that they couldn't even make out what was all in the room. And the reason why I had mentioned the dental recognition and the medical implant recognition and things like that is because some of that was all that was left.
Ooh.
That's how bad. That's how horrific. As the investigation continued throughout October, the number of decomposing bodies increased. So it was originally 115, and now it's at least 189 were removed from the funeral home. Originally, like I said, the count was 115. This new count was announced by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation on behalf of the Fremont County Sheriff Alan Cooper. The CBI stated, quote, "On October 13th, 2023, they were all removed from the Return to Nature funeral home in Penrose. The effort was coordinated by the Fremont County Coroner's Office with support from several entities. Teams removed at least 189 individuals and transported them to the El Paso County Coroner's Office. The total number could change as the identification and investigative processes continue," end quote. Officials at this point stated they were beginning the second phase of the investigation, and that was with CBI. And CBI specifically stated, quote, "The second phase of this comprehensive process includes confirming identification and completing family notifications. Family notifications will be conducted by a team led by the Fremont County Coroner's Office, victim advocates, and others, and this is expected to begin in the next several days," end quote. At this point in time, there was still no timeline for the completion of the investigation. That's how bad this was. So police in November arrested funeral home owners Carrie and John Halford in Oklahoma after the married couple allegedly fled Colorado to avoid prosecution. In December, relatives who knew or feared their loved ones were among the abandoned bodies watched in person for the first time as the Halfords appeared before a judge. One woman held up a photo of her late son, who she thought may have been among the mishandled bodies. Mid-January 2024, there was a preliminary hearing. This audio that's about to play paints the picture of the investigation as it took place.
Andy, today the courtroom saw just gut-wrenching images of each of the rooms inside the funeral home. Those photos showed presumed bodies stacked on top of each other. An FBI agent on the case testified that the floors of some of the rooms should have been white. Instead, he said they were brown from human decomposition fluids and a layer of insects, including maggots and flies. The FBI agent testified that the bodies found inside the funeral home included adults, infants, and even fetuses. He said some bodies were not fully covered. Sometimes more than one body was put into one bag and others were put into plastic bins. He also said investigators found a bone grinder and a box of concrete mix in one of the rooms. The agent added one of the individuals found inside was dead for more than 4 years before their body was discovered by police. The agent testified Also, one of the bodies identified inside the funeral home was of an Army Sergeant First Class who was supposed to be buried at the Pikes Peak National Cemetery. Now, the agent said the grave at the cemetery was then exhumed and a different person's body was found inside the casket, wrapped in a covering and duct tape. We spoke with a woman whose father was identified inside the funeral home. She says seeing the photos and hearing all of the details today at court was overwhelming.
They had his body for 10 months, and it should have been dust. And they just had it oozing all over everything else. It's just disgusting, unfathomable.
The same FBI agent testified about records for a business bank account he says belonged to the Halfords. The agent said the records showed that 660 pounds of concrete mix were bought at Home Depot. A CBI agent also took the stand today to discuss the forgery counts. He testified that deaths were inaccurate. The death records were inaccurate, listing them as buried or cremated. We also heard from an intelligence official at the district attorney's office who reviewed Carrie's phone records. He said she searched online ways to avoid detection, how to avoid being served, and she also searched herself.
Prosecutors also revealed text messages sent between John and Carrie showing they were under growing financial pressures and had fears that they would be caught for mishandling the bodies. In the texts, one of them actually suggested getting rid of them by digging a big hole and treating them with lye or setting them on fire. This, of course, was as soon as they started to accumulate. 23 of the bodies had death dates from 2019 and 61 were from 2020. As the audio you heard states, the remains included adults, infants, and fetuses, as well as animals. They were all being stored at room temperature in the neglected building known as Return to Nature Funeral Home in Penrose. FBI agent Cohen stated, quote, "It looked like something you'd like to forget but can't," end quote. And I also have a picture of the place where they had to open up the window and such, and you can see the hearse in the driveway.
Like, how did they keep going in there to put more bodies in there?
I have no idea. I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine the smell at that point in time. I can't.
No.
I mean, I've smelled it. I've smelled, a few decomposing bodies, but not 100, I can't imagine that many, almost 200 bodies completely putrefied. You know what I mean? I can't imagine that. I don't know. At this time in mid-January of 2024, the Halfords are accused of abusing corpses, stealing, laundering money, and forging documents over several years at the Return to Nature Funeral Home. Again, this one was the one that was based. The main office was based in Colorado Springs, but the bodies were actually stored in Penrose. That's where this is taking place again. So they are each charged with approximately 190 counts of abuse of a corpse, 5 counts of theft, 4 counts of money laundering, and over 50 counts of forgery. Carrie Halford's attorney, Michael, I'm going to butcher his last name, Stuzinski, did not immediately, right? That was pretty good. Mm-hmm. Did not immediately challenge the evidence from the scene that was presented by prosecutors, except to question cell phone data that prosecutors said placed Carrie Halford at the Penrose facility with her husband. So John Halford remained in custody at the El Paso County Jail after his bond was lowered from $2 million to $100,000 during a hearing, which was the week prior to this. So again, this is mid-January of last year.
Wait. It went from 2 million to 100,000?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it did. Well, I think they kind of knew at this point in time that he was hard up for money. I don't know. Probably ventured to guess it was all right.
I have so
it was
many
a good
questions.
enough amount. Yeah. At this point, several families who hired Return to Nature to cremate their relatives have told the Associated Press that the FBI confirmed their remains were among the decaying bodies. I believe that at this point in time, several dozen sets of remains still had not been identified, by the way. So yes, I'm saying 190, but at this point in time, there were still some floating around that they didn't have the 190 count yet per se.
Mm-mm.
So John Halford was worried as far back as 2020 about getting caught, according to the prosecutors. Quote, "My one and only focus is keeping us out of jail," end quote, said one of the text messages. Other texts included messages between the Halfords about selling off assets to cover their expenses and worrying about, quote, "losing everything," end quote, if they were exposed. In 2020, there was an exchange. John Halford messaged his wife that they needed to begin, quote, "restoring the building in Penrose," end quote, and appeared to suggest various ways to get rid of the bodies. And that was according to one of the investigators with the DA's office, DA's district attorney's office, DA's office. And his name was Kevin Clark. He was the investigator. Quote, "Options. A, build a new machine ASAP. B, dig a big hole and use lye. Where? Question mark. C, dig a small hole and build a large fire. Where? Question mark. D, I go to prison, which is probably going to happen," end quote. That's what the message said, according to Clark. It was not clear what the new machine referred to, by the way. So, in yet another text from last year, John Halford wrote about dealing with decaying bodies before he appeared to give a dinner order. Quote,
God.
I want to take a shower as soon as I get back because while I was making the transfer, I got people juice on me. Want the double cheeseburger, lettuce wrapped with everything minus tomatoes, please," end quote.
No way.
Swear to God. Further details on how the bodies came to be mishandled have not been publicly released after the DAs objected to unsealing affidavits in the case. The discovery of bodies prompted an effort to identify them using fingerprints, dental records, medical hardware, and DNA. Officials made the plan in mid-January to level the building where the bodies were found. The bodies recovered included that of a former Army sergeant, first class, who is believed to have been buried at a veterans cemetery. Investigators exhumed the wooden casket and found the remains of a person of a completely different gender inside. The veteran, who was not identified in court, was later given a funeral with full military honors at Pikes Peak National Cemetery. April 15th, 2024. With the count up to 190 decaying bodies, with some of the remains had languished since 2019. The couple, John and Carrie Halford, were indicted on federal charges that they misspent nearly $900,000 in pandemic relief funds on vacations, cosmetic surgery, jewelry, and other personal expenses. And of course, this is all according to court documentation. According to the indictment, it reaffirms the accusations from state prosecutors that John and Carrie Halford gave families dry concrete instead of their cremated ashes and alleged the couple buried the wrong body on 2 occasions.
Oh my gosh.
It also stated that the couple collected more than $130,000 from these families for cremations and burial services they never provided. The 15 charges brought by the federal grand jury are in addition to more than 200 criminal counts already pending against the Halfords in Colorado State Court for corpse abuse, money laundering, theft, and forgery. The federal offenses carry potential penalties of 20 years in prison and $250,000 in fines. The owners, right?
I'm sorry. I'm like,
When I was reading this, I remember hearing about it, but when I was like doing all the research for this, I had to sit back and think, like, I've been on crime scenes before and nothing like this, obviously. But in this case, you have already deceased individuals. It makes it no different. You know what I mean?
no.
They're all victims in this instance. So you have the families of the people who were deceased, who were supposed to be, whether they were supposed to be cremated properly, buried properly, whatever it may be. I mean, now you've basically doubled, even tripled the amount of victims if you think about it.
Oh my
So
gosh.
anyways.
They gave dry concrete as remains.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine the karma? Can you imagine
can't.
if they're if there is something after this, the judgment day they're gonna have, can you imagine if ghosts are haunting them?
I can't.
I
Imagine.
can keep on going. Like I just this is bad.
I know. All right. So the owners of the Return to Nature funeral home entered a federal courtroom bound in shackles as they made an initial appearance before U.S. Magistrate Judge Scott Varholick. Assistant U.S. Attorney Tim Neff argued the couple were a flight risk, stating, quote, they simply evaporated from the community, end quote. After they allegedly fled to Oklahoma last October when the decaying bodies were first discovered and before their arrest on state charges in November of 2023. So it only makes sense, right? The judge did not immediately decide if the couple should be released pending trial. He did set an arraignment hearing for Thursday, April 18th of 2024. Carrie Halford's attorney, Chaz, another crazy last name that I'm probably going to butcher, Melahersic.
What is up with all these
I know.
last names?
I know. I should probably know better, but no.
No.
Said he would argue against detention at the next hearing. John Halford's public defender, Kylie Latendress, told the judge that he had been following his bond conditions in the state case and that detention was unnecessary. The new charges and accusations did trigger more anguish for families who sent their loved ones to the funeral home. Of course. I mean, I can't imagine the feeling. I can't. Every new revelation about the case is a jolt to Tanya Wilson, who hired Return to Nature to cremate her mother's remains. Wilson spread the ashes with family in Hawaii. After the grim discovery, Wilson was told those ashes weren't actually her mother, whose body has since been identified among the 190 decaying bodies. Hundreds of family members like Wilson had thought they put their loved ones to rest or clutched their ashes close, only to have that healing torn away. Wilson stated, quote, I honestly feel like I have whiplash and I can't hold on to one emotion long enough to be able to process it, end quote. Before the new indictment was unsealed, public records showed the Halfords had been plagued by debt, facing evictions and lawsuits for unpaid cremations, even as they spent lavishly on themselves. The indictment alleged the couple used $882,300 in pandemic relief funds to buy items that also included a vehicle, dinners, tuition for their child, and cryptocurrency. The fraud involved 3 loans obtained from between March 2020 and October 2021. Previously released court documents from the state abuse of corpse case reveal more details about what they were spending money on. They bought a GMC Yukon and an Infiniti that together were worth over $120,000, enough to cover cremation costs twice over for all of the bodies found in their businesses last October. And that was, of course, according to court testimony from FBI agent Andrew Cohen. Wilson stated, quote, that is just thoroughly disgusting, for a lack of a better term. Just reading about all the money that they had, just the price of the 2 vehicles that he bought, it was enough to just do right by these families, end quote. The Halfords also paid for trips to California, Florida, Vegas, as well as $31,000 in cryptocurrency, laser body sculpting, and shopping at luxury retailers like Gucci, Tiffany and Company. At this time, the couple had not yet entered pleas to the state's abuse of corpse charges. The couple once claimed to a former landlord that they would settle their rent when they were paid for work they have done for the Federal Emergency Management Agency during the COVID-19 pandemic. The business's website featured logos for FEMA and the Department of Defense. FEMA has said they do not have any contacts with the funeral home. A Defense Department database search also showed no contacts with Return to Nature. The company failed to pay more than $5,000 in 2022 property taxes at one of its locations.
Are you kidding me?
No, gets worse. Hang on. Then last year, the business was slapped with a $21,000 judgment for not paying for a couple hundred cremations. And that's according to public records.
They are the laziest criminals I've ever heard of.
I know. The Helfords' alleged lies, money laundering, forgery, and manipulation over the past 4 years devastated hundreds of grieving family members. An investigation by the Associated Press found that the Halfords likely sent fake ashes and fabricated cremation records to families who did business with them. They appeared to have written on death certificates given to families, along with ashes, that the cremations were performed by Wilbert Funeral Services. That funeral service denied performing them for the funeral home at that time. It never happened. As the decomposing bodies were identified, families learned that the ashes they'd received could not have been the remains of their loved ones, and the court documents allege at least some were dry concrete. As far back as 2020, there were concerns raised about the business's improper storage of bodies, but there was no follow-up by regulators, letting the collection of bodies grow to nearly 200 over the following 3 years. Colorado, and the reason being, Colorado has some of the weakest funeral home regulations in the country. Funeral home operators in the state don't have to graduate high school, let alone study mortuary science or pass an exam.
What?
Uh-huh. So next you'll hear the actual audio from one of the victims stating she wants more restrictions.
It's been so weird and so hard and so challenging.
Mary, we first spoke this time around a year ago. What has this last year been like for you?
It's been a roller coaster of emotions, up and down, still grieving, going through all the firsts without my husband, but also making sure that everybody knows that we're here, the victims are here, the victims are in pain. Victims are still here. We're still victims. We still, we're all still grieving the loss of our loved ones. I don't want Daryl to ever be forgotten. He was a good man. There's 189 other bodies here alone that were good people that deserve to be remembered for the love that their families had for them.
What is your hope for a year from now?
A year from now, I hope that Dora has gone through and made the regulations and made them so tight that this won't happen. I'm hoping that the court cases will be all settled and done with, and they will be sitting in prison, and I don't even have to think about them, until they get out. Just really hoping that within 1 year, nobody in the state's going to have to worry about this happening.
The Helfords case and others in recent years spurred Colorado lawmakers to introduce legislation to strengthen oversight with rules that are in line with or exceed those in other states. Those bills are currently moving through the state legislature. On October 24, 2024, John Halford, 44, his wife, Carrie, 47, co-owners of the Return to Nature Funeral Home, each pled guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud in the scheme, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Colorado. They face maximum sentences of up to 20 years in prison. They are scheduled to be sentenced in that case on March 20th, 2025. It is conceivable that the state prison sentence would run concurrent to the federal sentence. So March 20th.
We need to remember to follow up on
Yes.
this one too.
The prosecutor's office stated that the clients had been promised that the remains of their loved ones would be buried or cremated. On November 22nd, 2024, the married co-owners of the Colorado Funeral Home, where nearly 200 decomposing bodies were found, pled guilty to corpse abuse. The two pleaded guilty to 191 counts of abuse of corpse. 4th Judicial District Attorney Michael Allen, whose office prosecuted the case, stated the counts include 2 instances where the wrong bodies were buried. The judge accepted their pleas during the hearing, though they have not yet accepted the plea agreements and will reserve the judgment for that until sentencing in the upcoming months in 2025. So Carrie faces 15 to 20 years in prison and John faces 20 years. Carrie's bond was revoked during a hearing at that point in time, and she was placed into custody. John was already in custody, and he was represented by the public defender's office. So their sentencing has actually been scheduled for April 18th of 2025.
Mark your
that's-
calendars.
Yes. Allen stated, quote, "Obviously, this case has been a huge emotional struggle for all of the families that are present. The impact on these family members has been immense," end quote. He acknowledged that the victims will likely never recover from the violation of trust, but that his office was honored to achieve justice for them. As it stands now, the victims in this case are those who entrusted the couple with their deceased loved one's remains, and they are fighting for stricter regulations for funeral homes. 2 sentencing dates are set, one for state, one for federal, April 18th, keep your eyes out, and March 20th, 2025. And those are the dates respectively. And that's all I have for now.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to say. I need to see the setup of this building
It's really not that grand.
because around here in Kentucky, normally the family will meet with the funeral director or whoever. They will say what their wishes are for their loved one. They will arrange their funeral. They will give their bio on the person. They will do all the things. I don't know how you can hide a smell like that with that many bodies,
I know.
even if in a separate building. Did they not have the means to cremate there? Did they cremate there?
No, they were saying that they were giving it to another service, another funeral service
And-
to do the actual
Okay,
cremation.
That's what I thought you said. And they said, no, we
Mhm.
never did that
mm-hmm.
ever.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they got free funding
Yes.
with
They
federal
faked that.
money. Probably.
Yeah. How do you fake that? How do you fake FEMA connections, federal agency connections? How do you fake that? I mean,
Well,
their laws must be super lax because I can't imagine.
Yeah. What I don't understand is they had federal funding and everything. So this is money that came to them not out of their pocket, and they didn't even think to be smarter criminals and purchase refrigerated units or whatever, the ability to cremate, or I don't know, do anything that they said they were doing. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
How did they think this was going to end?
Well, he knew in 2020 that it was going to go down. He knew then. Because remember, some of these bodies were already, and I'm sorry for being so, but some of these bodies were starting to pile up in 2019.
Right. That just blows my
So,
mind. I'm looking
strange.
at pictures of the couple and the funeral home.
The thing about the couple is I don't want to say they look normal, but they look
do.
normal.
They really do.
They don't look like I would trust them with my family's remains. I mean, I wouldn't look at them and think, oh my God, they own a funeral home. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
I wouldn't think that.
Mm-mm. This is insane to me. So they're demolishing the building now?
They already did. They did. They leveled it. There's nothing there. They were talking about making a memorial there. I don't know if that happened, but they were talking about that.
Thanks for covering this. This was very interesting. If anyone listening was affected by these crazy people who own this ridiculous business and you would like to come on and talk about it, hit us up. Or if you work in the industry and you want to come on and talk about it, message us. We would love to have you on. And yeah, that's all we got. So until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.